Great, we're ready to start. Thank you so much, George, for joining us to have this great conversation. Let's just start out with an easy warm-up, and let's start out with just a brief introduction. You know, let's think back to the days when you go speak in front of the kids and how you would introduce yourself to as someone who they've never seen before, and we can give it a start there, as brief or as long as you want to go on that, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Well, I started out by being introduced to mid-level and high school children by Jimmy Lickman, who is a survivor of the Mauthausen concentration camp, which my platoon liberated on May 5th, 1945. I met Jimmy very coincidentally at a luncheon given by the National Holocaust Museum in Washington. And we became pretty fast friends. Jimmy wanted to know my impression of entering the camp with 26 other guys and what I saw coming through the gates, looking at thousands of prisoners being liberated for the first time over years. And I must admit that I didn't have very many words to convey the impression that what we had seen. The camp is located outside of Linz, Austria, and the camp held some 60,000 inmates over the time, and it was really set up as a death camp. It had gallows, gas chambers, a killing wall, any means to liquidate the prisoners. Had factories all around the camp, which the prisoners worked at a good part of the day. They were fed 200-300 calories a day. And anyway, because of all this memory that I had, Jimmy asked me to convey it to the students in the most graphic way that I could. But remembering that these are children who would find it hard to believe that one person could do the most unspeakable things to another. So anyway, we did go from school to school, making these speeches, meeting the children. From time to time, I would wear my uniform, which was always a joke, asking how I could get into it after 70 years. And of course, the answer was I had a good tailor. Anyway, that was how we got around with Jimmy. And then we added some other men who were liberated. We added what they called child liberators. These were kids who were 10, 11, 12 years old, who were in the camps and were able to elude capture by the Germans in the camps, because generally the Germans did kill the children.
Yeah, we can take a break.
You got to ask me another question so I can...
Yeah, so the next question will be if you could walk us through the day that you found Mathausen, you know, like as you mentioned, that graphic detail, you know, I know you've mentioned before the smell of the air, things like that, so maybe that trip from Linz, how you found out about Mathausen, even why you guys were going there, and then what the rest of that day looked like, if you remember.
The 11th Armored Division came down through Germany, through Passau, through Regensburg, and ended up in Linz, Austria on about the 3rd of August of 45. And there we spent a day or two replenishing our uniforms and our vehicles. We were then told that somewhere further east, the Russians were somewhere around Vienna and were advancing towards us, and it would be pretty good if we could meet up with them. And in the meantime, we would be surrounding some 25,000 Germans that were still known to be an effective fighting force. Being in a reconnaissance outfit, the 41st Cavalry, our job was always to go ahead of the full division, scouting to see what was out there so that we could radio back the strength of the enemy, their position, what kind of equipment they had, etc. So on the morning of the 5th, our platoon, which is 27 men, that's 25 combat soldiers and 2 combat medics, were ordered to advance east in order to find the Russians and hook up with them later that day. So we set out early that morning on the 5th, a beautiful, pretty day, very warm. And as we're going down the road, by the way, we have 3 light tanks, 3 machine gun jeeps, and another vehicle, I forgot, I think it was an armored car. Anyway, as we're going down, we started to smell an odor that we just couldn't identify, but was pretty bad. And we're riding in open vehicles, which made the odor much more intense. And these are through open fields. So as we approached the top of this odor, we see off to the left what we would call in the Old West like a garrison. This was 2 heavy entrance gates. From the entrance gates were barbed wire strung out for hundreds and hundreds of yards, with guard towers intermittently placed. And we look at this and we get an order from the scout sergeant to drive up to the gates to find out what the heck this is. And as we do, we see these guard towers are empty. Prisoners in ragtag uniforms are hanging on to the barbed wire. So as they are hanging on, the sergeant orders one of the light tanks to come up and hit the door. And they break through the front door. And there, for the first time, 27 young American GIs, I imagine the average age was about 19, 20, walk in and see what the inside of a concentration camp looked like. Just question.
The next question would be if you could kind of pick up from there and let me know what else, basically from that point on, what you guys were witnessing, if you can.
Once inside the camp, we are, of course, being on a combat mission, not knowing what was really in here, we broke apart. The machine gun jeeps rode all over the place, looking to see if there were any German soldiers, whether they were armed, whether there was going to be a firefight or not. Turned out no. The Germans left the night before. They knew about us being in the vicinity, so there was no combat. We reported back to the division in Linz what we had seen, and the numbers, the wounded, people dying in the streets. And within a few hours, good parts of the division, remember the division is about 15,000 men, good part of the division come rolling up to the camp. We find out that what we were doing in that few hours of giving the prisoners our rations that we were carrying was the wrong thing to do. We were overfeeding them. Their stomachs couldn't absorb the food. Anyway, that was stopped, and the medics came and started what went on for almost a month, tearing down the infected buildings. By the way, that's where the smell came from. All the buildings were infected. The dead and dying, rotting corpses. No sanitation at all. Open pits. Food not examined at all. So anyway.
Did you ever see the gas chambers or the ovens? And
Well, yes, and of course in riding around, the gas chambers were still hot from a few days before. There were some corpses hanging on the gallows. The dead were all over the floor, some still semi-alive. We didn't do much maintenance because our orders were to find the Russians. And the moment the division came up, within about an hour we were ordered to leave the camp and continue on the combat mission.
Was that all? Is that all? That was your time of seeing Mauthausen?
That was my time, was about 5